Hello everyone and welcome back to Raya Affairs. My name is Elisa and I'll be your host for this episode. Raya is a youth-led international think tank that translates the abstract world of international affairs by simplifying rather than generalizing. Raya is a place where you come to learn about the stories and worries of political leaders, the behind the scenes of decision makers, and how politics impacts and changes your life. This is Raya Affairs, filling you in wherever you are. As always, I would like to start with a disclaimer that expressed opinions in this episode are welcome, even though they're not a direct reflection of Raya, as we specialize in unbiased writing. So today we're diving into something a little bit different, but still super relevant for geopolitics, and we're going to talk about semiconductors. The article we're discussing today is titled Modi Hot as India's Semiconductor Reforms Draw $18 billion in Foreign Investment, written by Bryan and actually co-edited by me. It was the first article I had the opportunity to edit, and I'm really proud to have Bryan here with us today. So at first glance, this might sound a purely economic story about investments, reforms, and industry policy. But as the article makes really clear, this is much bigger than that. So we're going to talk about global supply chains, technological sovereignty, and how countries are competing to control the industries that will define the future. Because today chips are not just phones or laptops, but they're about power. So hi, Bryan. Welcome to the podcast. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, Elisa. Nice to see you. Yes, my name is Bryan Thorne. I am a third-year student at IE. Currently studying business and international relations. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So now, before we dive into your article, we always like to start with a quick ice-breaking question. So if you could sit down and have a conversation with one political leader, past or present, who would it be and what would you ask?
So just to give a quick brief context of who I'm going to say, I've been recently diving into the history of where I'm from, which is Peru, and especially on its politics. And I would definitely like to sit with late former president of Peru, Alberto Fujimori, and ask him if the self-coup of 1992 was really a self-thought choice, or was it a decision that was planted by one of his advisors, which was Vladimir Montesinos, which for a long time has been suspected to have been controlling Fujimori when he was president.
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting answer. Actually, I don't know much about Peru, but I guess this is a very interesting topic. So I suggest to all the listeners to go check out some Peru history. So, moving to your article. The article suggests that Narendra Modi is hot right now, largely because of the success of India's semiconductor mission, which has attracted around $18 billion in investments across 10 projects. For listeners who might not immediately see why this is such a big deal, why does attracting semiconductor investment matter so much today, and why are chips suddenly such a central part of global geopolitics?
So, like you said, Elisa, at the beginning of the podcast, semiconductors are now more than just chips. They are the building blocks of almost every electronic product in the world, with it being so crucial to powering everything from our phones to cars and even computers behind tracking devices and military assets, has become a critical part of the supply chain of many countries. So, the investment of in these components, it is particularly in its creation and even design, assembling, cooling, storing, etc., requires a substantial multi-million euro investment. So a lot of companies are starting to move into these critical components and holding much more than just in this private sectors, but actually involving the public sector into it, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused a massive global supply chain shock that led to a worldwide shortage of these chips that caused pains and ripple effects across the globe. And with few players actually involved in the global supply chain of semiconductors, such as Taiwan, China, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and the US, it is crucial for other countries to begin scaling up and building their own industries.
Great. Yeah, I agree 100% with you that COVID really made countries realize how important how supply chains are important, because once you get disruptions like a pandemic, then you realize that you're too reliant on other countries, and you need to become more self-reliant, of course. So one thing that actually really stood out to me in your article is also that India in many ways is like a late entrant into this semiconductor race, because as you mentioned, of course, we have countries like the US, China, Taiwan, South Korea that have been building these ecosystems and supply chains for decades. So this made me wonder, do you think India is trying to catch up with these countries, or is it trying to have maybe a different role in the semiconductor supply chain?
In a way, it is trying to do both. The pandemic really exposed India as another dependent country on the global supply chain. And this bottleneck just left them to fend for themselves, costing them a lot in the production side of electronics, telecommunication products, automobiles, and defense equipment until the shortage was unblocked. And with Modi, as we've seen with several other industries and policies, is not only just about catching up, but it's also about resilience. See, Modi launched this campaign that I'm not going to try to pronounce in its real name, but it's essentially about building an India that is self-resilient, in which they boost their manufacturing industries and increase the integration with global supply chains. And it is almost aiming to satisfy, also, not only is it aiming to be self-resilient, but it also wants to establish itself as a trusted partner that is able to contribute to not only in the design part, but also on the production and manufacturing front of the supply chain, and also put itself as a fast, high-growing economy.
In the article, you also mentioned that the India Semiconductor mission isn't just about building factories, but it's also about developing an entire ecosystem, so from design to manufacturing. And this feels like a very ambitious goal. So I wanted to ask you, as you mentioned, do you think this is really about self-reliance, so reducing dependence on imports, for example, or is it more about positioning India as a key partner within the global supply chains?
Again, I think it is about both. The India Semiconductor Mission, or the ISM, is aimed at this overlying idea of India becoming self-reliant, meaning that it's able to control its own manufacturing side, as India already has a substantial amount of chip design talent. And it also wants to become a reliable partner in the global semiconductor environment, especially now that the US is playing an isolationist game or sort of approach due to the leadership in the White House. And a lot of countries, especially in Europe, are starting to become a little more skeptic of China, so they're starting to turn to India. And now, touching on Europe, I would like to bring into the recent agreement trade deal that they had just been able to struck between the European Commission and India, in which they're aiming to reduce tariffs, and that will be, I think, one step into becoming more integrated in their trade flows, which can lead to a bigger investment from chip companies in Europe to India.
Thank you so much for your answer. You made it very clear right now. So moving on, I think as we are discussing about it, this is not just industrial policy, but it's actually geopolitical strategy. So especially in a context where, as we were saying, the US is restricting chips exports to China, and global supply chains are being reshaped, as you were also mentioning, with Europe partnerships with India. So my question would be, where does India fit into this? I mean, you already mentioned a little bit of this in my previous question, but still, is India benefiting from this broader shift in the supply chains or not?
Most definitely. I think most definitely India has and will enjoy a hefty amount of investment especially in the past few years since the inception of the ISM. To be more precise, like the article flashes it, it is 10 semiconductor projects amassing $18 billion in investment, which is let me be a little bit more informal. It's a crazy amount of money. We're talking about billions of dollars. And that will not only be 10 projects, it will most likely multiply 2x, 3x as India aims to topple down a lot of the barriers that were restricting them from being more nimble in the way that when companies apply for projects. Most recently, for example, I read that the Dutch company ASML, which is the leading manufacturing of lithography equipment, which basically draws the designs and circuit patterns on chips, and India's Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, I hope I pronounced that right, had discussions, and basically showed us a glimpse of a future in which the Dutch company was involved in this goal of India to grow its own semiconductor industry. And like the article discusses as well, it is not only the ASML who are interested, but it's also Foxconn and Microtechnology, which have some have joint partnerships with, for example, with Tata Industries, several of their subsidiaries that are involved in this sector, to build plants or already have plants developing or developed as part of the ISM. So it is definitely benefiting from this broader shift.
Thank you so much for the answer. And so, as we were mentioning, Modi is building strategic partnership all over the world, but especially also with countries like Singapore and Japan. So that's really interesting because it shows how we were saying like industrial policy and diplomacy are becoming really intertwined in these days. So how important, and I guess they are these partnerships for India's success in his semiconductor mission? And could India realistically build this industry alone, or is international cooperation absolutely essential here?
I think one of the most important factors in the building and the construction, the creation of semiconductors is the know-how. I think IP, intellectual property, is very important in the development of these very, very sensitive units of electronics. So India, while having the talent to make the design, which is an important component like any other part of the supply chain to build a semiconductor, if you don't have the know-how for, I don't know, manufacturing or cooling or storaging or whatever it is, right, you cannot really be successful to be self-resilient. So these partnerships are crucial because what India offers their partners, per se, Japan, they offer them a growing market, which is the Indian market, that holds 1 billion people. It's an insane amount of people. And it's a huge market that is only growing more and more and more. And its economy is seeing more and more growth. So on its own, India will not be able to build its semiconductor industry, but it can leverage what it has, meaning its vast market with consumers that are willing to consume, as well as a substantial amount of the chip design talent. So there it can play with the pieces it has to attract not only partners in the form of states, but also in the form of private companies.
Yeah, as you said, exactly. Like India has a huge share of the global semiconductor design talent. I think it's around 20%. But as you said, also it lacks manufacturing capacity. So it's kind of like a mismatch here. And like staying on this topic, I want to go a little bit more in depth. So how big of a challenge do you think it is to translate the talent that India already has into actual industrial, say, capability? And what are the biggest obstacles that India can face in this process?
That's a very good question. I think that its biggest challenge to translate talent into industrial capability is having the places, or basically having the factories where all this talent can be applied, that can be used. The problem that India was facing for several decades was a big diaspora of people, a lot of its talent moving out. For example, you have a lot of Indian talent in U.S. companies like Nvidia, like AMD. So it is a big loss for India, not only for economic reasons, but also in the matter of national interest, which also translates to national security, because these chips are so important for their economy, but also for different assets related into different parts of for example, defense. So it really needs to be able to have physical, tangible factories so they can have this talent remain in India and feel that India is an attractive market. Their domestic market is attractive, so they don't have to look outside and be like, oh, China looks good, or oh, Japan has incredible opportunities, or Taiwan with the TSMC, which is where one would be most likely to look for a job as a young Indian chip designer, or the US, but rather look internally, which is exactly what needs to be translated. And the biggest obstacle that India, I think, still faces and might still face for a while is most likely is to attract significant investment from bigger players. It's not to say that the players that have invested in the ISM are not big, but we need a catalyst, a pivotal player that really places the approval stamp in India in its mission to build its semiconductor industry, that finishes to rail in everyone else. That being said, Nvidia, if Nvidia were to invest in India, I think it will be the turning point for India. And that's what it still needs to focus. Whether that being increase the investment that the government is placing on the ISM by covering the costs of the creation of the factories, or whether it being easing business and tax exemptions, and making certain regions, talking with sub-state governments about maybe becoming some sort of tax havens for these companies, for these chip manufacturing companies. It will have to be something that is attractive enough for a bigger movement to come.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I feel like this is just the beginning of India's rise, let's say, to power in semiconductors, geopolitics, let's say. So I totally agree with you. Let's move now to my usual explain to me like I'm 5 years old moment, which is my favorite part of the podcast. So if someone who doesn't follow tech or geopolitics at all would ask you, why does India investing in chips matter so much? How would you explain it in the simplest way possible?
I think the simplest way to explain it is that if you're trying to build a structure as a kid, you want to build something, right? You immediately think of Legos. Your Lego is your chip. It's your building block for anything you will make. So one small piece like a Lego is your semiconductor. And from that little thing, you can make anything. But in technology, in this sense, anything that's related to technology, which is pretty much everything nowadays, if you think about it, can be built with that little thing. And that's why it matters so much to invest in chips nowadays. It is the oil of the 21st century.
Yes, this is exactly why I love this moment, because with little metaphors like this, we get a perfect picture of this big dynamic that is going on, you know? So I believe that Legos are the perfect example, because as you said, like in today's world, everything is run by technology. Like without technology, basically we wouldn't know how to live. We wouldn't have access to anything at all. And the backbone, or like, yeah, let's say the backbone of technology is of course chips. And it's not just about, you know, like everyday life. It's also about military. So that's why like nowadays chips equals power and equals, power basically. So yeah, no, I love the Lego metaphor. Amazing. This is my favorite thing to do in this podcast. Okay, so now we can zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. So your article says that or argues that India's semiconductor push is part of a global trend, as we were also mentioning before. So countries are investing heavily in domestic industries and trying to secure their own supply chains. Especially after the 2020 pandemic, they realized they needed to focus more domestically. So looking ahead, do you think we're moving toward a more fragmented global economy where countries are going to build their own tech ecosystems and or not? And where do you think India will fit in the future?
I think the question about if we're looking at a fragmented global economy, it's very hard to answer. Personally, I think we're looking at definitely a shift in dynamics or a shift in the top player in the economy. I believe that most likely we're gonna see China rising to the top. However, India will definitely become a key player. It will not be left behind because it's not under Modi. He's not letting India stay behind. And while Modi is aiming to build India's own semiconductor industry to be self-resilient, it is also looking at how India will fit better into the global semiconductor supply chain, and which is important because I think unlike the US is looking right now, which is trying to isolate itself as it feels that it suffered an attack these past few these last decades. India is trying to be more of a leader, of a comrade, of someone who can be trusted, sort of a friend, if you will. And so India will fit as possibly second to China, but not for long. It will definitely build its own strategic partnerships, but also trade agreements with other players who are looking to detangle themselves from the West, specifically referring to the US, and also becoming more wary of China's intention. And that player will be India.
Great. And with this, we come to an end of today's episode. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today and for breaking this down. This is one of those topics that at the beginning sound very technical, but then it's actually deeply political. And it really shows how something like semiconductors, which most of us never maybe think about, it is now at the core of global competition. And of course, it's shaping everything from economic growth to national security, geopolitical power. So it is a great reminder that the future of global power might not just be decided by traditional politics or military strength, as it used to be, but by who controls the technologies that actually everything else depends on. So anyways, thank you so much, Bryan, for joining us today.
Thank you, Elisa.
And to our listeners, make sure to check out Bryan's article on rayagroup.org and to follow us on social media to stay updated on new articles, podcasts, and upcoming content. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Raya Affairs.